daring do of spies and fighter pilots, dashing men who put their country first, broke hearts they left behind, broke bones. They too have stories, and those stories live on in the mystery of war. Tokyo Rose is an alluring story now, but Allen Swerdlowe was left with nothing but questions about his mysterious warrior father. My search for my father, Nathan Swerdlowe, began in earnest in 1992. As my mother lay dying of lung cancer, she took my hand and told me to read my father's secret cache of paper for clues. In 1958, when Nathan was on his deathbed in a New York City hospital, I was not yet 10 years old. The tubes going into his nose made him look absolutely awful. I was hustled out of the room and not allowed to attend his funeral. There was always something odd about my family's life. So many things went unexplained, especially the abrupt death of my father. Once independent, I moved a dozen times, but always took with me the few mementos that I had of my father, including a large leather case embossed in gold, Army Air Force Navigator, Lieutenant Nathan Swerdlowe. The case bulged with World War II papers and photos, but I was too involved in my nomadic and artistic wanderings to fully examine it. There was also a ballpoint pen, a giveaway for the Pepsi distributorship he had operated since the war. On one side of the pen was the familiar Pepsi label. On the other side was the name he had chosen for the distributorship, Trinity. Where did that come from? What did it mean? I began to read through his thick stack of papers. The more documents I read, the more I began to feel that they concealed as much as they revealed. He had also saved dozens of letters from my mother written during 1944 and 1945. They were cryptic, gently probing to learn where he was and what he was doing, all the while attempting to keep the flame of their romance burning. Photos show my mother to have been a very attractive and glamorous woman, a prize to be won, a movie star like Katharine Hepburn or Elizabeth Taylor. There was also a photo of my father in full uniform in the New York Daily News in early 1944, accompanied by a short article about his appointment as navigator. There were dozens of photos of him on the beach or in the company of other flyboys. He always seemed to be at the center of such groups. Some of my father's papers referred to the accident. I couldn't figure out the circumstances and details of the papers, but it seemed to have involved an airplane and to have taken place in Ireland. My attempts to research the accident proved fruitless until, out of the blue, a letter arrived. The writer had information about my father and specifically about the accident. On the night of May 29th, 1944, Nathan's B-17 had taken off from a base in Walton, England, to gauge the weather in preparation for D-Day. Near midnight, 2 of the 4 engines quit. They had to jettison all non-essential equipment through the bomb bay doors in order to make the best emergency landing a few miles out to sea. The first raft with Nathan, co-pilot Larry Ketterer, and 2 more guys in it eventually reached land, 150-foot high sheer cliffs, raked by 25-foot waves. Each time a wave brought the raft in, one of the men got out. Nathan was the 3rd guy to do so. When the last, Ketterer, was swung in, he lost his grip. His body was being dragged back out to sea as the raft began its descent. At the last moment, Nathan grabbed Ketterer by the ankles and brought him up onto the rocks, saving his life. In Ireland, 55 years later, Larry Ketterer told this story to my son and me as he embraced us and asked us to pray. Shortly thereafter, he died peacefully in his sleep. We learned that only Nathan had been ordered back to the United States, into a hospital complex in Miami, Florida. He was sequestered there for 1.5 years. The diagnosis? A hammer toe? That was the reason to keep an experienced navigator away from the front lines at this critical point in the war? Understanding the first mystery, the plane crash, brought me face to face with the second mystery, the circumstances surrounding Nathan's early death. While Lieutenant Nathan Swerdlowe was stationed in England in 1944, a group of scientists, technicians, and soldiers, under the scientific command of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer and the military command of General Leslie Groves, worked on building an atomic device in Los Alamos, New Mexico. By the spring of 1944, By the spring of 1944, the Oppenheimer group had been toiling for a year to build and test the gadget. A suitably remote site for such a test was found 230 miles to the south of Los Alamos in the sparsely settled Jornada del Muerto, Valley of Death. The engineers called the place Trinity. Biologists knew very little as yet about the power of plutonium on humans. I began to collect information about the cause of my father's death, lymphosarcoma. Cancer could spring from carcinogenic sources, from the environment, and directly from radiation. Could the ballpoint pen with the unusual name Trinity be the clue? I learned that 15,000 Americans, including 742 pregnant women, had been experimented on with plutonium under the aegis of the Manhattan Project. Some were directly injected with plutonium without their knowledge or express consent. Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that Nathan had made several trips to Texas to a transfer point for Los Alamos, quite near the Trinity site. I got permission to visit Trinity. It is one of the most beautiful natural places in the United States and reveals little to a visitor of the earth-shaking first atomic blast that occurred there on July 16, 1945. Oddly enough, at least in my eyes, the stone monument on the site resembled nothing so much as a huge gravestone. I began to wonder about the pilots and navigators of two B-29 bombers during the first atomic bomb detonation there. Could my father have been the navigator of a plane whose orders were to fly through and around the mushroom cloud of the first atomic bomb explosion? The federal government finally sent me an answer to my request for information about my father's possible participation in the Trinity test. It came from, of all places, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Well, the cover letter stated that my father's record, excerpts of which were enclosed, showed no duty for him at Trinity, but rather on July 16, 1945, had him as a resident in the Miami Beach Hospital. I decided to go through the voluminous documents carefully. Cover letters can be as concealing as they are revealing. One of the attached excerpts was a form that listed the diseases that would be compensated for by the government as war-related, a list that included lymphosarcoma. Why send that unless his disease was in the category of war-related? It also said that victims and their dependents could be compensated for deaths related to these diseases. I vaguely remembered my family receiving checks in my name from the time my father died until my 21st birthday. I had previously learned that Nathan had received a card in the mail every year directing him to go for a medical exam, a standard governmental procedure designed to keep track of those who had been irradiated or otherwise poisoned to determine if cancer had surfaced. There was also a page in the excerpts that listed his whereabouts during 1945 with one very significant gap between June 23rd and August 13th, 1945. The exact weeks when my mother was querying him on where he had gone, why he hadn't received her letters, and hadn't written her on his regular schedule. One of the pages felt thicker than the others. The second one had stuck to it. Unlike the rest of the excerpts, it appeared to have been sent by mistake, since its title was not mentioned on the cover page as an enclosure. It was dynamite. A certificate attesting that he would at all times, especially after he was discharged, refrain from speaking about the military information which had been vouchsafed to him in the course of his duties on pain of severe penalties. My father had signed this document on August 13th, 1945, the exact day the Trinity tests ended. Thus concluded my search for a man I consider a true American son, one who unintentionally gave his life for his country. For me, the pursuit of the cause of his death and his missing year brought not added tragedy, but closure and redemption, bringing me closer to my sons and allowing me to confront the tenuous relationship between life and death. P.S. J. Robert Oppenheimer died at age 62 of lymphosarcoma.